I'm Kim Hurst. I'm a strategy and planning manager at the Vodafone Procurement company here in Luxembourg. And since, as Nick referred to earlier, he refreshed our purpose agenda back in 2019, I've had the pleasure and also the challenge of driving our purpose program across the supply chain for Vodafone. The challenge has been steep, it's a big learning curve, and I have personally enjoyed the journey, and I'm looking forward to what we can do in the future to drive that further. The main role for me has actually been determining what we can do as a supply chain function to address primarily the climate limitation of the temperatures to 1.5 degrees to avoid the irreparable damage to the environment. So the topic today that we are here to discuss is, as Oleg kindly said, is how we can use innovation to drive sustainability. Now, as we have advanced in technology over the past years, we have improved the society in which we live and the lives of the people in it. But unfortunately, this has often come at the cost of the environment. With increased pressure from the consumers, investors, and governments, the pressure is on us all within the organisations to answer perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we face yet, which is how do we avoid this irreparable damage? Now, thankfully, this is not the question that I have to answer because I have a panel of experts here to do that for me. So without further ado, I'll perhaps hand over to you, Maria Vittoria. You can introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am Maria Vittoria Trussoni. I am Head of Sustainability and Green Tech for Entity Data. So let's say my job, in 3 words, is, as we were speaking with the other panelists, not to make the wheel turn, but somehow to break the wheel and use innovation in order to pursue sustainability and assess the impact of innovation in terms of sustainability. So thank you.
Thank you. And Nicole?
Hello, I'm Nicole Zethelius. I'm the Global Head of Sustainability and ESG for CGI. And yeah, I work with helping clients in the area of understanding indirect business, which is what we call Scope 3 in our industry, the elusive Scope 3, so indirect business activity, coming as an advisor from the United Nations Economic Commission, European Economic Commission, as well as the IPCC.
Thanks, Nicole. And Patrick?
Yes, hello, my name is Patrick Blankers. I'm a program manager sustainability for Ericsson. I'm based in the Netherlands, and my main responsibility is to create sustainability engagements with our customers in Europe.
And Tony?
Hi. I'm Tony Darcy, and I work at Nokia. I am the Global Director of Sustainability, or ESG as we call it. And I look at everything from the reporting to the narrative and how do we embed sustainability through our business and tie it to both our strategy and our technology decision making. And it needs to show impact every time.
Thank you. And last but not least, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Andreas Greving. I'm working for Delta Electronics, and I'm mainly looking into the passive infrastructure of mobile networks. 5G is one of the buzzwords here. And with 5G, we see an increase of energy cost. What we are doing, how we can reduce it, how we can transform energy from A to Z with the highest possible efficiency, and how we can use 5G networks also for the topic we are discussing here today.
Thank you, everybody. So we have a very knowledgeable panel here for this discussion, which I think we could actually take over a week to discuss if we wanted to, but we are on limited time. We only have 30 minutes. And so for the main topic of the day, how do we bring innovation and together to drive sustainability? So I'll open with the first question. Perhaps, Maria Vittoria, you'd like to start with this one. How can new technology lead us to new climate solutions in order to drive sustainability?
Well, yes, that was the killer question. Well, coming from a system integrator company and an innovator company, let's say what we do is that we study new technologies to monitor and assess what is the impact, but not only that, also simulate and see how a system is behaving. So, for example, we just opened a research center, an innovation center, dedicated to industrial metaverse, which is digital twin, where we are building digital twins of infrastructure in order to simulate the environmental impact and the usage of resources without having to make physical simulations. So this has a very big impact on sparing a lot of resources and, of course, gaining knowledge over the systems that you're managing in order to have efficiency. So, but maybe also...
Yeah, I think if I say something, one of the interesting issues is the subject or the theme of this show is actually impact innovation. And sometimes we have innovation and we don't look at the impact. And I think it's really important to look at the whole picture. Yes, we have to concentrate on our footprint. We have to look at how we minimize that all the time. But the bigger picture that this industry has and the unique opportunity is to actually help others decarbonize, which is a much greater impact than our own. So whether it's decarbonizing the manufacturing industry through digitalization and connectivity, it's driving the handprint side of our business where we have the greatest opportunity. So for example, if I just take an example from our own factory, we have a mobile base station factory, our biggest one, in north of Finland or central Finland. It's completely digitalized now. It uses 5G, advanced technologies, IoT, cloud, video analysis, all of these, robotics. And we just recently measured the impact from an environmental perspective, as well as the productivity and efficiency impacts. And we see productivity 250% higher, and savings in per product produced 54% on energy. So you start to see the real impact that you have on a much broader scale, then apply that across manufacturing. Manufacturing is something like a third of the emissions in the world today. So reducing that part of emissions is a much greater impact. It's also an opportunity. So the industry as a whole has to move away from just looking at risk and expanding to the whole opportunity.
This was a very important part here you just have mentioned. You have measured the impact on your factory in Finland. And I think here the problem is starting. So getting the data, getting the environmental data, the energy data from any kind of consumers, if it is a factory, if it is a mobile network, we are doing, but we are doing very isolated. And we are doing not, I would say, enough to get reasonable answers from this data. Having the data, the second question for me is how to analyze this data, data analytics, and what we are doing then with this data to have a real impact for generation, for storage, and also for distribution at the end.
I think we're going to have a few conversations around data, actually, because it seems to be something that is top of our agenda. Okay, so we have a huge opportunity, really, for innovation in our handprint as well as our footprint. So effectively, we should be looking for the opportunities as well as just inwardly at our own footprint and how we can reduce that. Okay, great. So I have another question leading on from the first. So as tech firms, we are constantly introducing new products, as Dominique mentioned in his panel earlier, actually, as well as advances in the technology services that we offer. So one of the big questions, I think, for all of us here today is, how do we ensure that the climate impact we create by these advances can actually be reduced in line with the extremely aggressive targets, net zero targets specifically, that all of the organisations that we work for have set? I think, Patrick, you had some good examples of what Ericsson are doing in this area, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would say sustainability and innovation go hand in hand. And as Ericsson, we have committed to a net zero target by 2040. A net zero target which also spans across our whole value chain, so not just our own emissions, but also our supply chain and our products in operation. I will give a couple of examples of those three areas. So, for example, products in operation. Energy efficiency of our products, network equipment, is a very important parameter in the product design. And on a continuous basis, we are, of course, releasing new products in our portfolio. And it's typical that a new generation of hardware is more energy efficient than previous generations. As an example, last month we released a new product, a radio unit, which is 40% more energy efficient than the previous generation of products, and also 60% smaller, and smaller in weight, so it also uses much less materials. So that is an example how, let's say, energy efficiency is also affecting the product innovation in our company. Now, when it comes to our own emissions, our factories, the main factories where we produce 5G equipment, in Estonia, for example, and in the US, are already fully on renewable energy. But our latest factory in the US is 23% more energy efficient than comparable factories. We also won a prize as the Lighthouse Sustainability Project from WEF. So that is an example of how innovation also is relevant, essential in bringing down carbon emissions for our own carbon emissions. And then supply chain. Supply chain is much more difficult because we are, let's say, less in control of our supply chain. And our net zero target also means that we need to bring down emissions in our supply chain. And by 2030, we want to halve emissions in the supply chain. Like many companies in our sector, we have a complex supply chain, 10,000 of suppliers, so how to deal with that? So we have analyzed which suppliers are the most high-emitting ones. And we are working with this selected group of suppliers. It's a group of 350 suppliers, one by one. Together they are responsible for 90% of the carbon emissions in the supply chain. And we work together with them one by one and encourage them to adopt science-based targets. By 2025, those 350 suppliers should have committed to science-based targets, which means that they are in line with the Paris 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. And we are on track with that. So our net zero target is really driving the various parts in our value chain.
Thanks. I think the key for me there is it's aligning the supplier base to the same aggressive targets that we have, right? So for us, we're talking about 1.5 degree science-based targets, renewable energy targets, net zero targets and such, and bringing them into this alignment. Now, we talked about how we can leverage our position in procurement in order to actually achieve that. And at the moment, it's a case of having the conversation, requesting the alignment. In your experience across the panel here, do you think that that approach is enough, or do we need something stronger?
I don't think it's enough. I mean, we have to ask ourselves questions from the perspective of those running the business. What is the business value of actually doing this? From a procurement standpoint, you understand it, right? But from a business operations and a financial standpoint, what is that incentive? We need to start answering these things because what we do every day in our expertise, we haven't been able to communicate properly how that is a business value. And in this day and age, it is the license to operate as a company. This is the requirements from a legislation standpoint, but also we have supply chain shocks, we have the energy crisis, we have resource scarcity in some other areas. So it's also becoming a more modernized company. The incentive is to drive the innovation, modernize yourself as a company in order to operate and continue moving forward.
I think to add to that, you know, if you go back to the nub of the question, which is really, you know, how do we bring the energy efficiency in? Nokia's emissions, 93% last year, were our products in use by our customers. Not because the products themselves create emissions, although in their production there are some, but because of the energy they use. So the biggest impact we can have in reducing, first of all, is reducing the energy, or increasing the energy efficiency of the product. And that's what you have to drive for. And you start from the design, like you said. You start from the software, the silicon. You go through the hardware, you go through the services, you go through the management of the product. All of those things contribute to that 93%. And there isn't a silver bullet to any of that. But you actually have to look at each part of that process. And one of the problems is we say, how do we reduce? By saying that sentence, you've already decided you did it wrong in the first place. So start from the beginning of design. Design it in from the beginning.
Yes.
And sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, I would say, of course, we are in a similar position, and I agree that it requires a holistic approach. It's not only about hardware, but it's also about activating software that can put hardware in sleep mode when it's not used. And sleep mode doesn't mean automatically you have to switch it off during the night, but it can also be sleep mode in terms of milliseconds or even smaller. And that really adds to making the network equipment much more energy efficient. And on top of that, it's important to manage, operate the network in an intelligent way, measure energy consumption of all components in a network, because only by getting the right data, you can take the right measurements to improve the efficiency.
Very interesting point, what we are discussing now. And I think we only can change what we measure. And here I think we have a lot of things still to do. You are talking about 5G and that the radio power consumption is going down. From our supplier view for passive infrastructure, we see the opposite. So the site power for 5G sites is going up by factor 2 and 3. So we are all looking very isolated now into these different ecosystems. And I would say what we have to do now, we have to combine it, to have the overall holistic view, and then we can start again working on the efficiency. On the passive infrastructure side, 10 years ago, a normal efficiency value was around 90%. Now we are at 98%, and this is industry standard for 5G. We will not be able to bring this to 99 or even to 100. We are adding solar, we are adding wind, we are changing gensets to fuel cells, if this is possible, to have really green sites, but it is just a small snapshot. If we are not combining this, how these goods are produced, how the supply chain is driven, then we will never reach this overall goal where we all committed to.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, another big important point was digitalization. We have seen that most of the topics we have been discussing having the highest impact are operations that manage objects, physical objects, manufacturing, supply chains. So the fact that we are going towards big digitalization is also going in the right direction of not using the resources, but using digital services in order to assess what can be done. But for example, circling back to the example we were making before, imagine having a digital twin of a pipeline and making simulation on a PC rather than making a physical simulation would spare a lot of resources. But on the other hand, I think we should also be careful about the impact of innovation in itself. So, because we're kind of thinking that all that's digital doesn't exist because it's not physical, but it's not true. Today, ICT has like 3% of total carbon emissions, which is pretty low today. But with this exponential growth of ICT solution, we're going to reach 10% by 2030. So also digitalization is crucial, but on the other hand, we should be also careful on how we use technology.
From my viewpoint, the data will play the major role. The one who owns the data has the power of change. And this is something we have to drive together, and we should not look into individual, single, isolated ecosystems. We have to really go to the overall picture, and then using artificial intelligence to see blind spots that we have today in terms of energy wastes and where we can increase the efficiency. But this is only possible if the industry, also with the political framework, is working hand in hand.
Co-petition and not competition.
Thanks. I think that's actually quite a nice segue into the sort of final topic that we identified to discuss here today. So if I summarize it as, where do we as an industry really need to focus the innovation efforts in order to improve the measurement and hopefully therefore the management and reduction of the CO2 footprints, not just of our own, but also of those of our suppliers, and perhaps even in the handprint as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can start.
Go ahead.
I think to summarize everything that we are all discussing, because what's really interesting is we come from different perspectives. However, we're all talking about the same thing, and it's about data. It's about managing that data, standardizing that data, because right now there is no common global alignment on the standards of this. Just as, if we look at the trends of GDPR, cybersecurity, all of these areas, we should treat that in the same way. But what I see is that data is connecting all of this because we need information to have mission-critical decision-making on our supply chains, on our business activity. We need visibility of our value chain in a whole entire new way. And that is what's driving the innovation. That's what we're seeing now is the connectivity. So almost in the future, we're going to see a lot of API developers. We're going to see a lot of data management, data governance people coming into the workplace, manufacturing, utilities, construction, all of these areas. They're going to rely on this because to connect the operational technology, the hardware, with IT, you need that language to come together, and that's where you see the API specialists and the architecture around that. The real innovation will be connecting to a much larger data universe than what exists today.
And here I think this is one of the main reasons for the full 5G spectrum, for 5G networks. 5G is done for machine-to-machine type communication. And connecting machines, consumption, storage, entire ecosystem networks with sensors communicating to each other and collecting this data, this will be an enabler, exactly what you have just mentioned, for more efficient and eco-friendly solutions.
I think also, though, we have to have the technical answer to innovation, but we also need to have the business answer to innovation. So it's also about, first of all, do you have a total sustainable cost of ownership? Is it taken into account when you're building a product, when you're running a business? That's the first thing. So we have to change the way we think, as well as change how we do the business and how we build technology. And then you bring those three things together. And I think 5G gives you the capability of doing certain things. It allows all of the other technologies to work to their best because it provides a fabric. But then, on top of that, you need to look at how you look at the whole system. Not just the system in the technical terms, but in business terms as well.
Yeah, and people will be like, but Anthony, don't we already have this data?
Yeah.
And I think that's the really funny thing to talk about, is that all the data that we make sustainable investments on, and all these decisions are proxy data. It's hypothetical. We're working off of estimations, and what we are talking about up here is raw data, real data, validated data. That's important.
This has been a big challenge for us, actually. And earlier I said it's been a steep learning curve. For us in supply chain, data and its integrity and its accuracy is paramount. It's what we base all of our decisions upon. So starting the conversation and investigating into sort of scope 3 particularly, which is embryonic, and realizing that actually all of the data that we have is based on estimations, often which are outdated. And this has been a huge challenge for us. Similar to Nokia, our scope 3 sits around 87% of our footprint. So we have big challenges ahead, and thank you to our suppliers who are working with us to see how we can address this, because it's not an easy task.
Very interesting point regarding the data, and I just want to highlight the amount of data. We are engaged in this data collection since quite a while. So we want to collect all data that one 5G or 4G site is generating every day, every hour. The amount of data we are getting from site per day for each data point is very high. And now we think about, we have more than 600,000 of antennas and BTS sites across Europe. 600,000 sites multiplied with 200,000 data points every day from such a site. Who is analyzing this? We cannot do any more with human brains. So we have to go into artificial intelligence, giving us advice, finding energy saving options.
And I think it's key that leads nicely into a very simple statement. Our CEO always says, there's no green without digital. And it's so true. And that's why, even when you get to the solutions, you still need more technology and more digitalization to do that.
And perhaps that's where this innovative technology is where we need to find the answer, because at the moment we don't have that solution, right? Yeah. And maybe that's where it needs to, the focus needs to be.
Yeah, and actually I also agree with the fact that we need some sort of business cultural change. Like yesterday we realized that we could handle big data structures, and so everybody was going, let's do a data lake. Now we have a lot of data and we are realizing we need standard data to be able to get the information and the insights that we need. And now we are realizing we have too much data. We are not going towards a, let's say, digital sobriety approach, but we're just putting sensor everywhere, taking information. So on one hand, we don't have the right information to really measure what we need, especially in terms of energy, to take action. But on the other hand, we are collecting a lot of data from field and from everything, and we don't know yet how to use them. So that's for sure the target point and the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
I totally agree with you. I think we have to learn how to crawl before we walk, before we run in this area. There's far too much deregulation and ununderstanding of what we're doing here and why we're collecting things, and also collaboration, right? So as we are moving towards a more collaborative free market, how do we interact with one another? What are the foundational governance in which, you know, we can securely exchange information? We can securely collaborate with each other without putting our own interests at risk. So how do we mitigate those risks? How do we set up the right governance and foundation so that we can start running and start doing much more in this area?
Yeah, but this comes also to a very interesting question at the end. Who is the owner of this data? So which industry, which company? Yeah. And from my viewpoint, these data that we are collecting to make our planet more greener must be public, that we all have access to this data and come with, I would say, interesting proposals how to achieve this goal. If this will be in a kind of company property, this be handled secretly, I think we will also have some fake data at the end, manipulating different industries and trends in a certain direction. This must be avoided.
And the challenge will be, as businesses, we want to monetize everything. So we will see monetization of that data too. And then it becomes, as you say, who owns the data? How do we make it so that it's usable by everybody, but also that there is data sobriety? That, you know, you're not collecting data for the sake of data, but you do something with it. A really good example is simple security cameras just film all the time. 99.9% of the time, it's people going about their normal business. And nobody looks at that because it's unnecessary to look at. So you really have to look at what data you need, what you need it for, and how you're going to use it. Yeah. And who can benefit from it in a bigger sense, which is what impact is about. It's not just about what I do. And that's really important.
And how we use that data to achieve the goal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick, do you have anything else in summary?
Yeah, well, when it comes to data, I mean, if you have a product, we often get a question from our customers, what is the CO2 footprint of this particular product? And in order to give a correct answer, you would need to collect, of course, a lot of data in the supply chain, of course, also from your own operations. And of course, you can spend, let's say, endless effort in collecting the right data about the CO2 footprint of a particular product, what we call the embedded footprint of the production of a product. But of course, there needs to be a kind of balance. Some things you just cannot exactly know. So you need to estimate. We as Ericsson, we also do life cycle assessments, which means that we analyze a particular product across the whole supply chain and calculate the carbon footprint. We cannot do that for all of our products because it's a very labor-intensive exercise. But the insights that we gain in our supply chain, in the whole ICT sector, are very valuable, and that gives us, as Ericsson, a good view on how to estimate the carbon footprint of all the other products in our portfolio.
I actually think this is probably the key point, like about the value. So you go back to, you know, getting to the value of collecting and having this information, which probably it's the biggest drive to also go back to the sharing of those data. So for example, a lot of, let's say, spontaneous organization or associations are arising in order for companies to exchange data, ESG data, like Entity Data also founded one, which is called Estainium, for ESG data exchange for some supply chains, because there is value for the companies that are participating in the ecosystem of sharing these standards and this data for the final, let's say, final product, you know, verification of such information. If you don't have this standard and this process in the middle, you don't get to the common result for all the stakeholders that are sitting at the table.
Thank you. So I think in the essence of time, unfortunately, we have to wrap up the discussion, which I think has been very interesting. So thank you to you all. What I'm hearing from the main sort of summary points here is data, which is great for us, but also changing our mindset about how we think about that data, how we utilize that data, and how we can drive progress as a result of gathering that data. And perhaps the largest opportunity that we have as an industry is how we impact our handprint as much as our footprint by changing the way that we look at things. And finally, I would say, just to close, sometimes we can come into these environments and often be viewed as competitors, but what I love about this topic more than any other that I've had is that I just see collaboration, and I think that without working together, there's no way that we can achieve this. We need to learn from each other, share our best practice, and standardize across the industry to make sure that we achieve these ambitious goals that we have. So I think with that, I would say thank you all.
Thank you
For joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.